The recording has been started. Welcome, everybody, to the Sunday Night Roundtable. Tonight's topic was going to be about working with your local and state and government and federal politicians to do the outreach to government. But something came up, schedule conflict came up. So Ashley and Max and Augustus and I don't know if we have anyone else who's planning to talk tonight. Hopefully we do. Some folks from 2052 are going to talk about how we do Scrum and project management. We've done some changes this year, some restructuring, like we always find things that we can try to improve. And so one of those things is we're trying out a new tool, and Ashley and Max and Augustus will go through that tonight and talk a little bit about our project management methodology. So go ahead. The floor is yours. Whoever's going to kick it off, take it away.
Yeah, I'll kick things off here. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Ashley Sillen, and I am one of the newer programming mentors on KnightKrawler. And at work, I'm a project manager at Medtronic. And so I was really excited to take the initiative of trying some new project management tools as part of our team and try to see if it improves how we do our build season. So this year, we've been trying out some new tools. We've been doing more formal Scrum, and we went through kind of a mini Scrum training with all of our students. And we actually identified student Scrum Masters, which Max and Augustus are the two Scrum Masters for the programming team. But we also have Scrum Masters for each of the different sub-teams. So Media has one, Build has four, and they're really in charge of leading the Scrum, helping to keep teams on task, and making sure that everybody has something to work on. So to kick things off here, I'm going to share my screen and go through a few slides I put together on Scrum methodology, and then I'll start on a demo of the tool that we're using. All right. So to kick things off here, for those who have done Scrum before, some of this will probably be a refresher, but I know we also have some students on the call which might not be as familiar with Scrum tools. So I'm just going to give a very high-level overview of what Scrum is, what project management and sprint planning is. And feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions or anything that you want to add. So to kick things off here, Scrum is a project management tool that is used professionally in many engineering companies. So like I said, I work for Medtronic. I am a Scrum Master. I do project management with my team, and we do a daily stand-up Scrum. The idea of Scrum is that we can break down projects into very manageable chunks, and I'll go through a little bit more of what that looks like here shortly. But as we break out work into chunks, we can see the stage of completion as we navigate through things like the build process. Some of the different ways that we've been breaking out our work is the backlog. So this is anything that needs to get done at some point. It's not urgent. It doesn't need to be done in this week. So anything like that, we throw into the backlog. These are things that we know we'll have to do at some point during this year, but maybe they're not a priority during the build season. Maybe they're something to consider after our regional competitions. So that's the backlog. The to-do column, that's anything that we do expect to do in the imminent future. So one thing that our team has been doing is we're breaking things out into sprints, and we've been organizing those sprints into week-by-week milestones. So anything that moves into the to-do column for us for our Scrum board is anything that we expect to do this week during the build season. So it allows us to kind of isolate what kind of tasks we actually want to tackle that week, and then sort out the things that maybe we're not ready to tackle yet. The in progress is once a student has picked up that task, we actually, one of our Scrum Masters on the team will actually assign the task to a student within our Scrum tool board. That student can then mark it as in progress. That signifies that they're working on that. And then it's clear to all the other students too that that's something that they don't need to pick up, or it already has an assigned owner. Review. So this is really important for, especially for our coders. A lot of times we'll finish something like writing an auto, but we're not quite ready to mark it done because we haven't actually tested on the robot. Maybe we're still waiting on build to give us the robot to actually test the auto. So that's where we move things when the auto's written, the code is done, but we haven't actually tested it to confirm it's completely done. And then finally, the done column, it's been tested. We know it works. We don't need to revisit this. Why is my slide not advancing? There we go. So in industry, the way we break out Scrum or kind of our Scrum tasks into 4 different buckets. We have epics, which is the highest level goal. So in this case, what we've been doing on our team is we're considering the epic to create the robot. Our highest level goal is, build something for Reefscape this year. The feature level is high level detail of the work that needs to be completed. So things like coding the robot, building the robot, creating the reveal video, some of those really big tasks that we have as a team that might take more than a few weeks to accomplish. The user story level is usually what we put on our Scrum board. So these things are more manageable chunks of work, things like coding the intake, building the intake, editing our reveal videos, something that might take about a week to accomplish. And then the task level is the lowest level of detail. So if we want to break things up into even smaller chunks, we can get even more specific into day-long tasks. But at least the way we've been doing Scrum right now is we've been trying to hover around that user story level. So something that takes about a week to accomplish. So talking a little bit more about sprints. So sprint planning is another project management tool that works alongside Scrum and has also been something that we've been implementing this year on KnightKrawler. So a sprint is a short focused period of time where a team is working to complete a specific set of tasks. So think about your week-long milestones that you want to accomplish. At the start of the week, we've been revisiting what we're planning to accomplish that week. Sometimes that happens over Slack. It's just kind of messages back and forth about our goals for the meetings. We might do an in-person meeting as well, do a quick huddle and talk about our weekly goals or our meeting goals. This is where we summarize everything that needs to be completed for that week. And then as we start looking at our Scrum, we can move things into that to-do column that I talked about. These are the goals that we have for a given week, and I'll demo what that looks like here shortly. So the way that we've been using sprint planning is we worked backwards from the very end of the project, thinking about what needs to be completed before week 0, before our Duluth, which is our first regional, champs if we make it that far, hopefully, and working backward from those different milestones to figure out what we need to accomplish, what kind of dependencies we have on other teams. So like I said, I'm a mentor on programming. So I've been trying to get my programming kids to think about, how long do they need to test the code? Working backward from those milestones, when does build need to get us the robot? And really set dependencies, blockers, and really manage that work so we can move more effectively. One of the challenges we had last year was programming got the robot really late. We were testing our autos on the practice field at Duluth. And by working backwards and having more control over that in the schedule, we're really hoping to have a more effective build season. Similarly, I really worked with media too, to work backward from some of their milestones. A lot of them aren't directly contributing to the robot design, but they still have some big milestones that they need to meet. So I've been working with them to think about, for them, it's our reveal night where we show a video showcasing everything about our robot. And so helping them work backwards from those milestones and make sure that they're capturing the right footage so they're not scrambling at the last minute to make that video. I've touched on this a little bit already about the idea of Scrum Masters, but one thing that we've employed this year is having set students that act as Scrum Masters to lead the project management piece of our build season. So these are different from our student captains, and this was intentional to kind of offload some of that work from the student captains. So on top of kind of that mentoring and captain responsibility, they also don't have to manage this backlog of work. So we've had a few students step into leadership roles, and I know we have Max and Augustus on the call today, who are 2 of our Scrum Masters for programming, and their responsibilities have been to lead a daily stand-up Scrum meeting with our sub-teams. And so during those meetings, they talk about what did we accomplish yesterday, what are we going to do today, and if there's any blockers that need to be resolved. One thing that's really critical about this too is just making sure that everybody has an assigned task, they have a clear objective for the day. We've had challenges in the past too where students just don't know what they're supposed to be working on. They come to the meeting and they just kind of sit there and they're kind of confused. We got a lot of that feedback during like our preseason events, that students didn't have a clear objective for what they were supposed to work on. So it's really the role of the Scrum Master to make sure that every student knows what they're supposed to be doing that day. So really what they're doing is working with the team captain to figure out what our weekly goals are, and then assigning tasks, running those Scrum meetings, making sure that nobody's bogged down with too many tasks, really just making sure the work is evenly distributed. Before I get into an example that we've been doing, does anybody have any questions or comments on Sprint or Scrum? All right. So I can go through an example here of Miro, unless Max or Augustus, if either of you would prefer to share the Scrum board. Totally up to you guys.
I've got the Scrum board up. I can share.
Perfect. Take it away. Yeah, so we've been using this tool called Miro. Is anybody familiar with Miro, has tried using it in work or for their build seasons? All right, so Miro is something that I use a lot at work as a Scrum tool. And one thing I really liked about it for like robotics teams is that it's a free tool that actually works on our school Wi-Fi, unlike a lot of other websites and apps. And it can work in a web browser. It can work off of an app on your phone or tablet. It's pretty accessible. And yeah, it is free. So the way the licensing works is you can have up to 3 boards for free, and an unlimited number of students can be in the board. One thing that we've been intentional about is limiting access to only the Scrum Masters and student captains and mentors. All students have view access, but select students have edit access just to kind of control who's in there. So the way we've broken it out, like I said, the backlog, the to-do list, in progress, review and test, and then done, just as a way to manage our tasks during the build season. And we have different tags along the way too. So we've been marking things by weeks of when we expect to accomplish that goal.
Yeah. Generally, you got the week 1 to week 6, and then for now we are keeping things more vague with after the Duluth and between week 0 and Duluth. Yeah. And also we have like places up here where members who can't physically edit the board can like leave comments, because I believe everybody can make sticky notes like this.
Yeah, anybody can leave a comment.
Yeah, or the hold on.
Yeah, I think they can make sticky notes or comments on anywhere on the board, even if they don't have the edit access.
Yeah. The great thing about Miro, another great thing, is that it's really easy to work with. So I can easily just create new tasks like this, title them something like program intake. And then we've got like a color-coded key. So intake, that would probably be here, pink. And then we can tag it as like a subsystem. And then, oh, I got this. Hold on. Yep. And then maybe it's a week 3 task, because we're in week 3 now, right? Yeah. And then let's say I want to work on this. I can tag myself there. And then when I'm ready to work on it, I can move it to in progress. When I'm done, I can move it over to testing. Then once build finishes there, this is builds down here. Once they finish it, I can test it and move it over to done. Yeah, so it takes like 5 seconds to do anything on the board. So very quick, very efficient.
And have you felt like the Scrum is going well, like for the actual stand-up Scrum meetings, or any learnings that you've had from
yes.
that?
Yeah, as long as you have at least one person taking a very assertive role, making sure that everybody's got a task. We do share outs of what everyone's completed, and physically having the board open during these times helps a lot, because you can be like, okay, you completed this task, move it to done, or move it to review/test. And then you later come back and make it, look nice. But it's a very efficient and fast process.
One thing that I've also really liked about using this tool too is I think it's a little bit easier to track dependencies. So before this, we were using just like a giant Post-it board, like actual like Post-its and a physical Scrum board in our gym. And there wasn't really a good way to track what things were dependent on what. And so in here, we've been adding tags for things that are dependent on like the build team, like we're waiting on some information from build, maybe we're waiting for the actual robot. We've been tracking dependencies on vision capabilities. So that's more of an internal to programming objective, is that once we have vision working, we know we can start working on some of these other tasks. So it's an easy way for us to track, maybe these are things that we just can't work on yet until something else is complete. And I know the build team especially has been using arrows to track dependencies as well, just on different aspects of the design. I will say, if people are trying to do this for their own teams, the arrows have gotten a little wonky with just like getting a little crazy, and we had issues with like merge conflicts. But I think now a lot of those issues have been remedied. But just kind of a disclaimer to people that the arrows maybe aren't the best.
Yeah, especially once you start moving stuff around. So if you see over here, we have an arrow leading from this to here, which looks great now until we realize, this still needs work on it. Let's put it into to-do. And then, we got arrows covering up everything. And it stops looking good and is very difficult to read. So they're good in minimum. Like when you have like one task that specifically leads to another, great. Other than that, they're limited in their application.
Yeah, and I will say that's probably the biggest limitation we found with Miro, is that it isn't the best for tracking dependencies. We found ways to make it work, and it's still better from what we were doing before. But I am curious if other teams are using any kind of Scrum tools or any apps or websites that maybe do a better job of tracking dependencies. Or if anybody's doing Scrum at all, I'm curious to hear about that too.
Yeah, that would be very useful to know, because we have a lot of dependencies. And here I can show off the schedule too, because we have a physical or like a actual timeline-based schedule. It doesn't have much on it. The big thing though is robot handoff, which is when we plan for programming to have the robot, and we can essentially build team can plan all their stuff to be up until robot handoff, which just makes it easier to visualize task timeline.
Yeah, it's kind of like those bigger milestones, understanding when at least programming should be able to get the robot to start their testing. So build went in and populated some of their high level milestones so that we can track it on the programming side, and hopefully avoid issues like we ran into last year with just, like we have more clear communication between the two sub teams to be able to track when we would be able to start testing things.
Yeah. Oh, let's do a question in the chat.
Yeah. 3291 is doing Scrum with whiteboard tags.
Dependencies.
Is whiteboard, that's in Microsoft, right? Does anybody use other? I'm not familiar with whiteboard. Or if it's a physical whiteboard. I've used, I know there's a tool on Microsoft called Whiteboard. I just haven't used it. Literally whiteboards.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
there is a virtual whiteboard on Microsoft Teams too.
Yeah, that sounds like, as good as a way of tracking any dependencies. Yeah, very visual. That's part of, the good part about Miro is it's quite visual. But yeah, probably whiteboard is as visual as you can get.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we just found, at least for me coming in with like project management experience, I found the Post-it note board that we were using, I guess is kind of similar to the physical whiteboard. It was just getting kind of unruly, and it was hard to manage to what was actually achievable for week by week milestones. We were just kind of keeping a backlog of anything that we were going to accomplish as a team at some point in the year, and it wasn't very clear what was actually achievable week by week. And it also wasn't very clear too, like what students were owning what.
Yeah, especially because towards the end of the season, it would start. The board was not that big. It would start to fill up, and it was very difficult to differentiate like sub-team tasks and who was doing each individual task. Yeah. All right. Looks like we got another thing in the chat. Keep our tasks 1 to 2 hour. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a good time frame. I think ours are probably closer to 3 to 4 hours.
Mm-hmm. Usually ours, we try to keep about like a meeting length. So usually something that can be accomplished in one of our meetings, which are usually about 3 hours. And at the start of our meeting, so Max and Augustus have been doing a good job leading the Scrum meetings too, and just making sure that everybody has something to work on. And the ideal situations, that task should take them the entire meeting, but still be achievable to finish.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Max.
We're just getting some more stuff in the chat. So team 2472 replaced physical whiteboards with a Google Sheets file. I wonder how easy that is to move tasks around. I'm not really good with Google Sheets though.
Yeah, that question had actually come up in our team when I was first presenting on Scrum. I had a few kids ask about using Google Sheets because it sounds like that's something that you guys maybe use more in school, or at least it's better integrated with like the various Google tools, Google Classroom, etc. One thing I find with Google Sheets is I think it is just easier it's a lot more of a manual process to move things around. And I really like the automation that exists within Miro. And considering Miro is also free, like the Google Sheets, it's just something that I preferred and wanted to test out with the team. I've also found too that sometimes Google Sheets can get really cluttered if you've got multiple people editing. And I've had a lot more like merge issues with people trying to edit the same cells. We did run into some of those issues with Miro, but I would say it's a little bit better to manage.
I can share some of the background of the different Scrum things the team has tried over the years. I think this is our 8th or 9th year of using Scrum on the team. We started with a physical Scrum board, and we did that for 1 to 2 years. When everyone's brand new to Scrum, oftentimes the physical process of moving a Post-it is good to understand the process. And so we were also working out of a closet back then. And so we had set up a trifold science board, and we had our Scrum board basically on a trifold science board, and we could fold it up and our Post-its would kind of stay mostly on the board and get put away every night. Then we moved to Trello, Trello.com, and we used Trello to do our Scrum management, very similar to what we see here in Miro. Trello has changed their pricing structure, their number of users allowed, and so Trello, we reevaluated it recently, and it is not an option because of the number of people we need to use Trello. So that went away for us a while ago. And we went from Trello to Monday.com when Monday started sponsoring FRC teams. So I don't know, that was maybe 5 years ago. And we did Monday.com for a couple of years. And then the free Monday went away. And so we decided, well, we have to evaluate something new. and we started looking at tools again. And then just before the season started, Monday said, oh no, we are going to let teams use monday.com, but we had already decided that we were going to move away from it and we weren't going to shift back. So I'm pretty sure Monday's free for teams again now, but we elected to continue to look for something new. We did end up building a very large 4x6 bulletin board, Scrum board, which is what Ashley and Max were alluding to earlier. And we put doors on it and we put padlock on it so that it's in a shared space. Nobody could mess with it when our team wasn't in that space. And we had used that for the last year or two. And then when Ashley joined us as a mentor and as a project manager, Scrum Master, we threw it at her and said, okay, let's do something even better. So continually trying to improve. And as Ashley mentioned, she went out and evaluated what would work on our school Wi-Fi? What does the school not block? And what has the features that we would need and the ability for everyone to be able to see the board. One thing I'll say too, logistically, the first few nights we started doing Trello with the teams, individual sub-teams, we would go into a classroom. So we had a projector and we had a computer and we would set it up so that it was nice and big on the screen and everybody could see it. That takes a fair bit of the meeting to travel down the hallway and find a classroom and get set up and get everyone sat down. We'll probably end up doing that on a less frequent basis, maybe once per sprint. As Ashley was mentioning, what's been working really well for us, especially if you have a small sub-team, programming often will have 10, maybe a dozen people there, sometimes fewer, is to just have Max or Augustus at the computer and just verbally shout out, this is what we said we were going to do this week. What's our progress? Because you don't actually need to see the board every single night. It's good to have everyone look at the board occasionally. But that has made things go a lot quicker to get everybody to work quicker by just sort of simply doing a stand-up and just having one person looking at the board and asking the group questions about what did you do or what did you get done. That really has made things go a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of going through student by student and say, do you have a task? Do you need a task? And then looking at the board and saying, do you want to do this? And then it can be assigned. So it's very clear leaving the Scrum meeting what everybody's going to go tackle. Whereas before it was kind of just like, okay, these are kind of the high level objectives for the meeting, but it wasn't clear what each individual student was going to be doing once they broke apart. And just because you had mentioned the larger sub teams too, one thing that I've been seeing the build team do is they've been kind of breaking out into groups based on like mechanisms that they're working on. Like the intake group, for example, has a Scrum Master, and like the elevator has a Scrum Master. And so they have 4 Scrum Masters for the entire build team since it is so large, and each of them can kind of manage the work for the individual like mechanism groups. And I think they've been doing it a little differently. And unfortunately, I don't think we have any of the build team Scrum Masters on the call. Because I think they've been doing it a little bit more informally just because of the size of their group. It gets to be a little bit more difficult to run more of a traditional Scrum. Whereas programming small enough that we can do kind of the normal Scrum stand-up type of thing.
Yeah, I think Build has color-coded down here based on group. It looks like, yeah, they've got green, orange, purple, blue, like purple's done here, so they probably have moved on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we got something else in the chat about when tasks being done, moving them off the board. We do something similar over here. Once something is like done, we're most likely never coming back to it. It just got like a graveyard
Just
like
a big dumping ground.
Yep.
That was a request on, I think it was the Saturday meeting, like yesterday.
Yeah, I think
someone had asked, like, can we start getting stuff off the board just because?
The programming's done. Task has gone down to here. Because all of these, and I think some got like deleted. It was like down here, and so just the top half was just of all of programming's tasks. So yeah.
But we don't want to delete stuff either because it's nice to maintain that history, and That way, if this does work out, we're trying this out for this build season and just seeing what works. And, if it does work well, now we have a history of all the different like individual tasks that we had on our board. So we can just like clone this next year and try it again.
All right. Do we have any more questions? Comments, concerns, anything?
Is anybody doing any other kinds of Scrum? Or I guess for teams that aren't doing Scrum, do you think this is something that could be useful? Really quiet bunch tonight.
Yeah, quite quiet.
Last time I presented on Path Planner, I feel like everybody was popping off, but also I think Path Planner was causing a lot of people issues, so it was more of a heated discussion.
I remember how big of a pain that was last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will just say like maybe some of our lessons learned from this too is I think if you are looking to implement this, I think Miro is a really good tool to try out because of how accessible it is. I think the color coding and tagging is really nice and easy to track. And I really like the ability to assign students to individual tasks. Some of the limitations that I've noticed is it does get kind of unruly when you have a ton of people in there editing. So trying to keep limited to the number of students that are in there at a given point in time. So I was pretty intentional with giving certain students view access versus edit access, just because if you have every student in there editing, like our team has like 50 students and you can't have all 50 of them in there editing at a single point. So that's one of my lessons learned is to keep the number of editors limited. And then I think with that too, you can only assign one person to an individual task on the board, which is a little annoying because sometimes you have more than one student working on it. So I would say that's another big limitation.
I think our current solution to that, though, is you just comment on the individual task and then you just add them. So I think.
Yeah, so it's not the worst thing. And if you move that item too, I believe it moves the comment.
Yep, it does. Let's see, I can move this down there.
So it's a pretty good workaround. It's just, it would be nice to just tag more than one student at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
yeah. That was kind of something that I was thinking about. Like, as you mentioned, there are some like downsides related to it. Gets very hectic if you even have just like 2 or more people editing compared to like the Scrum board physically. While it was a bit more annoying to, move things around at times, anyone could do it. You didn't have to have like only 1 or 2 people doing it, meaning everyone could be a bit more involved. But it would take a lot more work. So I'm kind of happy we switched.
Yeah. One of the big things that I find it useful is that this is just a big board. It's not nothing fancy with like individual like tabs or anything. It's just a big physical board that you can lay everything out on. So it is very all in one place kind of a thing.
And there's a ton of built-in templates too that you can just keep adding onto the board. Like the Miro website just has a ton of different templates. So like we imported the Kanban template. That's what we're using for our Scrum. We have the Gantt chart template up above, which is what we're using to build out our schedule. But there's a ton of other stuff too. So it's really just nice to, be able to play around with what tools will work best for your team. And with the free version, you get 3 of these infinite workspaces. So it's really easy to accomplish within the free version. You shouldn't have to pay for anything with Miro. Maybe as a lessons learned too, to kind of combat what Augustus was alluding to with it getting kind of overwhelming with people editing is maybe using those 3 workspaces to be for the individual sub-teams. So like build has their own workspace, programming and media have their own workspaces, and then you don't have everybody editing the same board at once. The benefits of something like this is being able to see what other sub-teams are working on and see where the work fits in. which has been really nice for programming and build, especially to be able to see like what mechanisms are done. Can we start testing things? Media's really liked it too, to figure out what kind of footage they can film now and seeing like, oh, build's working on this specific feature. This is a good time to go in and take some pictures and videos. So it is nice to see what other sub teams are working on by having them all on the same screen, but it is kind of a downside too.
Yeah, totally agree. Do we have anything even tangentially related to Scrum?
If there aren't any other questions on Miro too, I have a few slides that kind of break down more of the Scrum Master role too, if that would be helpful for people if they're looking to employ that. But I think one of the biggest takeaways I've heard from our student captains is that the Scrum Masters have been very instrumental in making this work. They said that that was a big reason why they felt like the Scrum tools had failed in the past, was just not having a clear owner of the Scrum process, or it was just a lot of extra work on the captain's plates to have to manage that in addition to their normal responsibilities. And so being able to break up that work and having like dedicated people that manage this has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's
and
a
it's
good point.
a good opportunity to build up leaders too that aren't your student captains too.
I don't think it was apparent that we've selected non-captain students to be our Scrum Masters, and it's a nice division of work. But I don't know that that was very explicit in the beginning here. But I agree. I think that's been a very nice thing for lots of different reasons, to give that responsibility off, to take it off the shoulders of our captains who are already very busy.
It also doesn't
Yeah,
take
and it
very
was
much
very
time.
intentional. Oh, sorry, Max, go ahead.
It does not take very much time in the slightest. I, as a Scrum Master, do this pretty much every day, and at the start of each meeting, and I still am able to heavily participate in the rest of my sub team's activities. Like, I think last Saturday, I programmed an entire subsystem and commands, whilst also doing some Scrum stuff.
Yeah, Scrum in general doesn't take that much time, being like the Scrum Master. So you can just add it on to what you were already doing when, like, maybe you don't have something going on. You can just go on the Scrum board, ask around, see if anyone needs anything moved.
I'm glad you guys mentioned the having non-leaders be Scrum Master. I introduced Scrum to DNA last year, and we've been using it mostly to keep track of just making sure everyone has a job at the meetings, primarily. But we haven't really gone to the next step of actually using it to start like being really minutia of all the different tasks, as well as going into a Gantt chart or anything. Mainly because we haven't really had, we've just kind of been having the captains step up to do it, and they're already busy. So is there anything, like, I'm trying to remember from KnightKrawler, but what was the next steps with the Scrum as you saw it? Was it started with just task management, but what do you think was the next best thing to start doing with it?
I think that's a Scott question.
Yeah.
All right. So I think when listing task is obviously step one, and everybody needs to know what do we need to get done. And so having those tasks, and anytime someone says, oh yeah, by the way, we got to get bumper boards cut this week, right? And so no one thought of that because bumpers are come to the end, and then you get that task on the board. I think the next step is when you start thinking about dependencies or scheduling. So the idea that you can't count bumper boards until you know what the outside dimension of your robot's going to be, right? And so you need to have the frame built, and you can say ahead of time that, well, we're going to build a 29 by 29 frame, but until you actually have the frame built, you probably still shouldn't put your bumpers together. And so you can get the frame built as a dependency. And then you may also say, well, we also have to decide how high off the floor we want the bumpers to be before we can mount the brackets, because we haven't done our testing on how easy or hard it is to push coral around, or how easy or hard it is to push algae around with the bumpers. So I think when you start looking at dependency, that can also help your students think further ahead, and you start stringing these things together. You can start thinking about multiple and triple and quadruple dependencies down the roads. And Ashley made a point earlier about writing code of, if you start working backwards, if this has to be done by this date, what are all the things that have to happen before that? So I think that can be really good when you can get students thinking backwards like that, and thinking ahead in that regard. When you start setting schedules of, we want to have this mechanism on the robot by this date, and we want to have the robot handed off by this date. And then you start looking at the dependencies saying, well, if we're going to have the robot handoff by this date, then we have to have our climber done 2 days before that. And if we're going to have our climber done 2 days before that, the elevator has to be on first, and the elevator has to go on. And we also have to have this arm mechanism for holding coral. That's got to be on there before we know where the elevator is going to go. And so you start working backwards through all those tasks. That's probably your evolution from identifying tasks and making sure everyone has a job when they walk through the door at the day, to this next bigger step of managing, more complete. That's just my off the top of my head response. If we sat here for another half hour, and maybe I'll think of some other responses, but
thank you, Scott. That was helpful.
But I do think that, when you take the idea of a Post-it note, and then you start saying, well, what is all the other information we could get on here? All the things that Ashley and Max and Augustus have talked about are sort of that next evolution.
Yeah, and I think when I'd come into the team too, I thought you guys were doing a good job of Scrum, but I think it was missing that project management piece. And I really wanted to get the students to start thinking about it like the robot is a project. And we have weekly milestones we need to hit. We can't just plan to do everything from day one, because we, like on the programming side, a lot of our things are just dependent on the design. Like, we don't know what to code until we know what the design of the robot's going to be, to some extent. And so, really being able to think backwards and be more intentional about what we're considering our sprints every week, of what are realistic milestones for us to accomplish week by week. And acknowledging that, like, when you create the Scrum board and you have all these tasks, it's not realistic for everything to get done all at once. And you don't want to assign a task to a student and have it not be something that's actually achievable, because that's also a really frustrating experience to the student. So it's nice for us to be able to say, like, these are things that actually can be done this week.
Ashley, you mentioned that you had a couple slides specifically for Scrum Masters. I thought when Augustus and Max were talking about how that's impacted them, or quite frankly, really didn't impact them in terms of the other work that they do on the team, I thought that was a good segue. Maybe we should go back to that now, and just some advice for students who think they might want to run the Scrum board.
Yeah, and so
I can stop presenting.
Sure. Yeah, so one of the things I'll note with the Scrum Master role too is, on the build side especially, a lot of the Scrum Masters are actually it's their first year on the team, which I think has been a really good way to develop like early leadership on students that were new. It's a good way for them to, also be able to observe how the build season works. And I think it's been a really good opportunity for a lot of those students coming in as, new members of the team and wanting to take on additional responsibilities. So I'll share my screen that just breaks out the different responsibilities and how we've broken out the work for KnightKrawler. And I mean, you can always figure out too, if this is something you want to implement, maybe it'll look a little different team by team. But logistically, what we've been doing is there's different levels of privileges on the Miro board depending on your role. So I guess I'll just start with kind of like the all students piece on the far right here, which is all students have the ability to view the Miro board. They can make comments, they can add the Post-it notes. So everybody has some level of functionality, but again, wanting to limit how many students are in there, but I think it's important that all students can still have a good idea of what's going on week by week. They can see what they're assigned to, and they can comment to the Scrum Masters as needed. For our actual Scrum Masters, so they have full edit access, and they're ultimately the ones that own the Scrum board. So they're really doing that day-to-day task management. They're assisting the student leaders in managing those logistics and making sure that all students have something to do. And we're not expecting the Scrum Masters to know exactly what can and cannot be done week by week. So that's really that partnership with our team captains to be able to provide that guidance more from the high level of, these are the overall milestones for programming or build this week. And then the Scrum Masters can take that information and start assigning tasks that we think are realistic. And so that was something that I was really intentional about too, because when I first presented on the kind of Scrum methodology, a few of the build captains were a little concerned with like Scrum Masters having too much power, and they're really the ones that have the final say over what happens week to week. And that wasn't the intention. The Scrum Masters are facilitating the logistics, making sure that everybody knows what they're going to be doing, and kind of being that first level so that the student leaders aren't getting bogged down with all this additional work. So the role of the Scrum Master every meeting is the quick 5-minute stand up to go through the board, assign everybody a task, move things to done if they are done, figure out what can be tested this week, and really just making sure that we know what's happening each day. I've touched on the sprint planning meetings too. So this is not something that happens every day, but maybe once a week on a Monday or every other week, we do kind of a bigger schedule review with the whole team, which is what Scott was saying, where we just presented in a room. So we'll go into a classroom and do kind of a larger sprint meeting. And usually this is driven in combination of both the student leader and the Scrum Master. Because ultimately we still want the student leaders to have a say in what we're doing week by week. The Scrum Masters are doing more the day-to-day. So that is a pretty big distinction there. Our student leaders, we do still give them access. They have full edit access to the Scrum board, and a lot of them have done a lot of the work with like the overall high-level schedule. So like the build schedule that we have in the Gantt chart that Max was presenting earlier, that was something that one of our build captains put together as a way to manage the high level schedule. And he put a lot of those tasks in there from the start. And then the Scrum Masters were the ones going in there and kind of refining all the stuff that the build captain put in, and they could start assigning things to people. So the distinction there is the student leaders own the high level build schedule or programming schedule, but then the Scrum Masters do the day-to-day within that schedule.
Yeah, and
sorry.
Captains, sub-team captains still do a lot with the day-to-day. They are at that meeting when we're doling out responsibilities, and they make sure that, everything is keeping on pace.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's ultimately the sub-team captains that are making calls on prioritization and management of those tasks. So they're really providing the guidance to the Scrum Masters on what we should be doing that week. So I know that was a concern too, because we brought in a lot of first-year students to the team as Scrum Masters. They were concerned on how they would be able to assess priorities of tasks, and that isn't the responsibility of the Scrum Master. That's still the responsibility of the student leader. And then in terms of mentorship, so at least with the way it worked out with our team too, we have at least one mentor in each sub-team that's highly skilled in Scrum and sprint planning, which has been really helpful too to help manage how we're doing Scrum on each team. But ultimately, all the mentors have edit access as well. They can assist with prioritization calls and help assign students as needed.
Do you get any questions about Scrum Master logistics?
What training do you guys do for that? Is it just like come a day and we're going to talk about it, or is there some other process?
I gave a presentation to all students on Scrum methodology. So pretty much the slides that I shared here And then so as part of that presentation too, I was like, think about if you're interested in the Scrum Master role, and then students that were interested. For some of the sub teams, we had to kind of pare down the list and select people. Once we identified who our Scrum Masters would be, then I gave them a little bit more specialized training just on, what their responsibilities would be. We went through more of a detailed overview of Miro, but all students got kind of a high level Scrum overview. And that was mostly just from my experience as a program manager. And I'm happy too, if there's teams that are interested in implementing Scrum or sprint planning on their teams, I'm happy to come in and speak to them or, drop in on a call.
There was a question in the messages. Someone just joined. The topic is on Scrum. Right now, more discussing Scrum Masters and that kind of thing. Who's managing the Scrum board?
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Augustus.
And Olivia, this is being recorded, so you can always go back and watch it on YouTube tomorrow or anytime after that, if you decided that you want to see the entire topic.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share the slides as well, if anybody is interested. Yeah, if you're looking for more Scrum help too, and if this is something you want to implement on your teams, you're welcome to shoot me an email. It's just ashley@team2052.com.
Well, do we want to wrap things up early tonight? Do we want to switch to open discussion about how things are going? Final call for any Scrum stuff. I don't think I cut you off. Or were we pretty much at the end, Ashley and Max? And
Yep, this is my last slide.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add, I don't think.
Okay. So let's first of all, let's do this. Oh, go ahead. Karma or Cram. Cram.
Hey, this is Chris.
Okay.
Up in Cambridge, 5464. So my wife and I both we're not official mentors, I guess. We're both on the Booster Club, but we help out where and whenever we can. And my son is here. He's listening in as well. And I stopped to ask him, how do you think this could be used for our team? And his feedback was he wasn't sure that it would add too much value because our team is so small. So I'm wondering, I know KnightKrawler is a much larger team. I think we've got 18. So everyone's kind of got their hands in everything. What would you suggest if we were to use this type of system for a smaller team?
Yeah, I think maybe you don't need to go to the full extent that we've done it. Just given the smaller team, it's probably easier to manage tasks and make sure everybody has something to do. But I do think that the way to track dependencies and milestones is really critical no matter your team size. And I think almost more, it can be just as important for a small team because you can track better like how quickly you have to accomplish each thing. And maybe that's even harder when you have a small team and less people doing the work. So I think I would emphasize from your end, I think the idea of the sprints and setting those week-long milestones, I think that that's something that would pertain to any team regardless of the team size.
I agree. I think at a minimum, it doesn't really matter how big or small your team is. In fact, when we introduced Scrum to KnightKrawler 8-9 years ago, my daughter was on the team then, and she was a big part of running the Scrum board at that time. And even today, she'll do a Scrum board for homework or for things that she needs to get done on the weekend. And so just identifying tasks and priorities can be very helpful. When you start saying every time you put a Post-it note on the chalkboard or nobody has a chalkboard anymore, on the whiteboard or on the bulletin board, and you realize that each Post-it note there is 2 to 3 hours, holy cow, there's a whole lot of things here that have to be done. And how many days do we have left? How many meetings do we have left? And you start thinking about, shoot, something's got to be cut, or we got to start adding more meetings. So I don't think it matters what size your team is if you are using it just to identify tasks and maybe giving them some level of priority, because we all know what it's like to get to week 6 and realize that we still don't have this thing done, and are we even going to get it done, or are we going to give up on that? And by identifying those tasks sooner, hopefully you can say we need to change gears and shift positions, because this ARM thing that we're trying to build, it's not working. We need a backup plan. And maybe your backup plan is we're doing 2 competitions, and for our first competition, this is all our robot's going to do, and we're going to focus on our second competition to do all of those tasks. So that would be my recommendation. I actually know several of our KnightKrawler students that once they have really gotten into Scrum, they've told me they use it for schoolwork, for team projects, to manage their group of maybe 3 students. I heard a student who said that they used it to plan a family vacation. So it's a good tool, and it's a good life skill to have. And especially if you were going to be an engineer or a software developer or work in any technical field, there's a really good chance that wherever you land, they're going to be doing Scrum in a professional area. And so being able to interview, is it for an internship or for a job, and be able to say, oh yeah, I've been doing Scrum for 3 years, that makes a big difference. And even if you just barely use it to manage your tasks, just being aware of what it is something.
Yeah.
It's a really good opportunity to develop leaders too. Just develop leadership skills on the team. I think that's so critical.
Yeah, and for your team of 18 people, you could probably just do one big group Scrum thing instead of breaking down into sub-teams. Because 18, that's larger than our programming team, and our individual programming team uses Scrum to a high degree successfully. So an 18 people team could easily use Scrum to the full extent in a team-wide effort.
I will say also that Miro is an awesome tool, and once you've sort of developed that mentality as a group to do Scrum, Miro is a great task. But honestly, if you're just getting started, stick 3 strips of masking tape on a whiteboard and start hanging up Post-it notes. Start somewhere. The physical Post-it notes are low effort. Every time you walk past it, you see it. There's a lot to be said about having a physical Scrum board, but it's going to be simple. But starting simple is a good solution.
Yeah, if you do a physical Scrum board, taking a photo of it after each meeting, so you have at least some digital copy that you can reference outside of meetings, is also probably quite useful.
Thank you. I appreciate all those suggestions.
Yeah, I think I could speak to the smaller team dynamic a little bit with some more experience. We used to be much larger. We were around 30 people pre-COVID, and then COVID hit and we dropped down to about 10. We're just slowly growing back, about 15 now. And so this is what we used to do back in 2019, which is a full Gantt chart that we did in Google Sheets. And there are lots of formulas and such in here, but you could have your dates and who was working on what, and it would build it out and show you how long everything was going to take to build the robot, essentially. We don't do that anymore. Once we drop down to about 10 students, this was just too much detail, and we didn't need it. When you have only 10, 15 students, Well, you may only have 3 programmers, and splitting up tasks is a lot simpler with a smaller team. So now we're back to Post-it notes on the windows. And it's working quite well for us so far, past couple of years.
I think we got a hand raised from Tanya.
Yeah, I think same for us. I will say our Scrum came out of our navigation team and our build team really wanting a better way to communicate exactly what's happening and who's working on what. And so we do, essentially 3 pieces of masking tape on a board, and we move magnetic whiteboard cards across. But what it's really done for us is our sub teams meet and have those meetings. But every once in a while, like every week, our leaders will get together and talk about our Scrum. But then any one of our captains can call a Scrum of Scrums at any time. And so then all the leaders of those departments come together and they all get in front of the board and they all talk about like what's holding everybody up, like where's everybody stuck. So even at a team of like, we run around 20 right now as well, we find it just facilitates communication to have that one visual point of interest and that one tool to hover around, and it lets them talk about what's going on and who's actually stuck in those dependencies.
Yeah, I admit I'm old. There is something to be said about having a board up that you can walk past every 5 minutes, and especially if you have a student comes up to you and says, "I need a job," not having to fire up a laptop, just being able to walk over to the Scrum board or them doing that on their own is an awesome thing to see happen. But at some point, you do get big enough and your process is complicated enough that moving to software is often the right choice. But to start out with, if you're unsure, just stick some notes up on a board. Give it a try.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just especially our team size this year, it wasn't as effective with the physical board. But yeah, I mean, even at work, we still sometimes do a physical Scrum board with a stand up.
Yeah, because one thing about the physical board that I've kind of noticed is it's really low barrier to like access compared to like, because digitally you can't have everyone be an editor, but everyone can be an editor on a physical board, which, because I know there's a lot of people, or there's at least some people that don't use the Scrum board directly unless prompted. Because it's a big hassle to log on to Miro and go on the board and find a task and then comment something or ask one of us to do it. So if you want to have more participation, on in person might have some bonuses in that direction.
One quick comment too, 'cause in the chat there was a request for the slides. Is there a good way to send them to everybody? I was trying to see if I could send it over the chat, and I can't find a way to do that.
Are they Google Slides?
I have it in Microsoft, but I could upload it to Google.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get it somewhere online, I can post a link in the comments on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, that works.
Even if it's just a PDF, if you can drop it in a Dropbox or a Google Drive folder or something like that, we can throw it in the notes.
Yep, I will do that. And then, if you want to add that with the YouTube video.
Yep.
And if anybody has any additional questions too, or wants to set up Miro, I threw my email in the chat as well. So you're welcome to reach out and I can help your team set that up.
I will say that I upload the YouTube video 5 minutes after we get off the line here. So it may take a couple of days to get the link added. But you can always go back and watch the video. Now, obviously, if you want to use the slides to present to your team, then you're actually going to want the slides. But you always have the option to go back to YouTube and watch the video too. All right, I want to do kind of a last call here for questions on this. Thank you so much, John and Tanya, for sharing what your teams are doing and your experience. I think that was very helpful. There is not a single right way to do Scrum or Kanban or whatever flavor of Agile you've decided to do for your team. So finding a system that works for you is any system is a good system oftentimes. There we go. I will copy that link now so I don't forget it.
Can someone try it to see if it works? I think I set settings that says, well, it says anybody with the link can view the slides.
Yep, I can see it.
As can I.
Perfect.
It works for me.
Awesome. All right, so let's do a round of applause here. Thank you so much to Ashley and Max and Augustus. We really appreciate you guys stepping, especially last minute. I mean, this kind of came up very last minute. We appreciate you guys stepping up and giving us a good presentation. It sort of worked out, I guess, that we recently have done this on the team, and so a lot of the stuff was prepared, but that doesn't change the fact that you guys stepped in and filled a vacancy in very short notice. So with that, I'm not opposed to wrapping up, but I'll open the floor to anyone who has any questions they might have. The last 2 weeks, we've talked about game strategy. Last week, we talked about robot design. Does anybody have anything that they got stuck on that they want to ask the group on, whether that's prototyping or design? Anything specific to their team that they maybe discovered in what they were trying to build this past week or prototype this past week? Let's do a quick 15-minute open table thing, and then we'll call it a night. Nobody has any questions because everybody's got their robot done. They're all getting at least 12 hours of sleep every night.
Has anybody tried driving their robot into the LG yet?
No, with bumpers, I assume.
Yeah.
I have not. Have you? We haven't. I
No.
should say.
Yeah, we watched the videos today of the Rembrandts doing it with various different bumper fabrics and configurations, and I'm worried there might be some robots tipping.
I share that concern. Yes, I agree. In fact, I did have a conversation with one of our build mentors on Wednesday about whether we were going to use sailcloth or the Cordova fabric this year. For those of you who aren't familiar, I think most people are using the heavy weave. I think Cordova is the brand that we have. It's more like a canvas style. And that's what we've used most years. But back in 2020, when those yellow balls, those squishy yellow balls, those balls were pretty sticky. That was a year that we used sailcloth because in our testing, we saw that it pushed those 7-inch yellow balls away better. But I don't know. This rubber ball, I don't know that this rubber ball is really going to make that much of a difference between the two. I guess every little bit helps, but I'm also thinking about that as well with the bumper fabric. So I'm very eager to hear John's talk next week. So for those of you who haven't heard John, who's on the call tonight, he and his team are giving a talk on bumper design and the bumper rule change and things that they've learned. I anticipate that will be a very exciting and well-attended topic because bumpers are changing a lot. So we will probably start putting together our bumper boards this week and maybe put together some foam for one side of the bumper, but we're waiting for John's talk before we do a lot of bumper stuff.
Yeah, and something on tipping robots, especially because we're going to have very tall robots this year. I was talking with our programming lead about having a special travel configuration of our elevator so that it is much lower, with as low a center of mass as possible, without still being able to easily move it up and down once we arrive at our destination, just to minimize the capacity for tipping.
I am particularly worried about autos, because if you end up having an auto where you pull off an algae and you've got a ball just bouncing around, your auto is probably very unlikely to try to avoid an algae that's in the way, and we may see robots getting tipped over before our drivers even get a chance to grab the joysticks. That makes me very nervous.
I know one thing we were talking about during when we were planning autos is that the algae could potentially be a big concern on during autos for that reason, because they could easily screw up an auto if someone bumps into one for whatever reason. So probably a good idea during autos to avoid them.
Yeah, I think the primary concern for that was getting in front of the coral stations, especially because that's going to be a high traffic area both in auto and during an actual match.
Couple of things. From 2530, we've got a test bot that we were pushing the algae around with the same bumper material as that we're using last year. I don't know that they've tried it at any higher speeds, but we had no issues pushing it around at what I would call a slow to moderate speed. It rolled just fine. But like others have expressed, I believe there is a concern that something could happen, especially in auto. I think that's everybody's going to have a hand over the A stop. So in case you see something like that coming, better to give up the auto than to tip the bot over before we go into.
And Jim, the bumpers that you're using, I think you said last year's spot, how high were they off the floor?
Actually, this is a test bot that we built in off season.
Oh.
I think these are about an inch up. We're actually going lower on our bot this year. Yeah. But I think last year's, or not last year's, I think this is pretty close to that, what last year's was also. But the test bot, I think, is right around an inch up.
Yeah, we're also thinking half an inch to 3/4 of an inch off the floor for our bumpers. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard the build team say.
And just for reference, we've got two different types of algae, and I think they've tried pushing both without any significant difference. We don't have the high ridged straight line.
Yeah.
We've got the curve.
The third type of algae. Yeah,
we don't have the third type.
That was a fun discovery last week when Andy Mark posted the video of the crosshatch algae and finding out that there's now two different types of crosshatch algae. Yeah, interesting.
I think everybody's so quiet because there's just so much going on. Everybody's so deep into it. And like you said, getting 12 hours of sleep. Yeah, right. About 5 months from now, maybe. But
yeah, I had to remember how to weld today. I welded up the cage so our students to have the cage this week. It's probably been over 2 years since the last time I did any welding. So yeah, there's always something to do, right? Everybody's always got something to do. Even when you're not at a meeting, there's lots and lots of research. Oh, it looks like Olivia has something she wants to post. Olivia, if your mic is working, feel free to pop into the mic. Otherwise, if you want to do it in the chat, we'll happily read it. Okay. Who has plans for Monday? So I'm curious to know what if folks on the call even have school. We do not have school on Monday. Irondale KnightKrawler is off on Monday, and the school is locked. So we can't even get into school to have an extra long meeting since there's no school. And then we have finals week Tuesday, Wednesday, or finals on Tuesday, Wednesday. So that no meetings during prior to finals. So yeah, it's a tricky week for lots of folks.
We actually have the pleasure we have access to the school, so we're going to be doing a nice meeting tomorrow. Hopefully, get a bunch done because we're starting to feel behind.
Likewise, we're able to get in. We're starting a couple hours early, starting at 4, going from 4 to 9.
I
9
think
is the official ending, but who knows?
I think even if we could get in, we probably would not be having a meeting because our finals day is Tuesday, Wednesday. So I think we would have the option to do a Tuesday meeting if we wanted to, but we're not doing that because of finals. But our school has Thursday, Friday off because it's the end of finals, into the semester, something like that.
Yeah, end of the semester.
I'm not a teacher, so okay, thank you, Max. And so we are, since there's no school Thursday, Friday, we are having meetings Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and then all day Saturday. So we are piling up all of our meetings on the end of the week, where normally we meet Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So that could be good or bad. I mean, I know that we'll have some exhausted kids by the end of the day Saturday, but it's that time of year, right?
Beginning of semester, though, will be a lot easier for robotic stuff. So,
Olivia asks in the chat, are some teams behind? Why don't we do a thumbs up or pick your favorite emoji if you feel like your team is behind? Yeah, I think KnightKrawler, historically, we always feel like we're behind, but this year, it depends on who you talk to. Some folks are feeling pretty good.
Like a lot further ahead than we were last year.
Sure,
Yeah,
I agree
way
with
better
that.
than last year.
Yeah, last year we were so far behind, though. We were writing and testing autos on the practice field during week 1 competition, so that was extremely far behind.
I think we're on schedule for a week 4 robot handoff. I mean, knock on wood, but that would be amazing. If we can.
I think our build team needs to look at our Scrum board a little closer. I'm less optimistic we're going to get that week 4 handoff, but it's encouraging to see that that's the goal, right? I mean, that's a great, fantastic goal to have. Now, Phillips is the same thing. We're behind, but we're still way ahead. Yeah. And I don't know what other people think, but I feel like last year's game piece really threw a ton of teams for a loop, right? I think that was a really tricky game piece to pick up. And then knowing that it was going to be a high speed, high impact game, everyone trying to go under the bumper for the first time and trying to figure that out. I think a lot of people were behind last year because it was such a unique challenge. This year, I mean, the pipe, the coral is definitely a unique piece to pick up, but the ball, we picked up balls many times in the past. There's lots of reference designs out there for that. So I don't know, maybe the game makes it easier. I'm curious, how about an emoji out there for teams that are planning to use an elevator, and then we'll do another one for teams planning to use an arm. Elevator first. Looks like lots of elevators. I think we may have actually just asked this last week, but I forgot. Okay, so what about folks that are planning to put no elevator but an arm instead? Okay, anybody out there planning to put an arm on their elevator?
I think that's us, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really intrigued to see how many different designs we see. Some years we have a lot of robots that look very similar. Some years we have every single robot in the field looks different. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out this year.
I think this year we're probably going to have a couple different combinations just because of the 2 different game pieces having probably only a couple ways to handle them. But then again, there are 2 different game pieces and 2 climbing variations.
There was some discussion last week about how difficult it was going to be to get a lot of LG, a human player, to get a lot of LG into the net, or even a robot. If once you got 6 or so up there, if they would start bouncing out because the barge would be full. I think I saw a video posted someplace, Instagram or Facebook, I can't remember which, and I think they had like 15 or 18 algae up in the barge on one half. So I'm changing my opinion now on that.
I think that's a bit misleading, though, because that's assuming that, I mean, they can still bounce out when they're up there. No guarantee you get them in the correct spot. I don't know if that's a accurate representation of something we should be expecting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think 15 is outrageous, and that seems really hard to get a ball up there. But maybe 6, 8, 10, maybe that's not so crazy of an idea. It'll be really interesting. I think once we get teams they have their test barge built, and they can actually start throwing some balls up there and seeing how bouncy they are, and their robots can start shooting some algae up into there. I think it'll be interesting to see what that actually looks like.
I think the human player aspect, as I was the human player who did all like the throwing stuff last year, the throwing aspect this year is a lot easier for sure. It's we're going to see a much higher success rate is what I'm thinking.
Unless they're bouncing all over the place. I am curious how easily they'll bounce out of the barge.
Yeah, I don't know. Will they bounce with the net, or is it really only that center lined? I don't know.
I'm thinking more once there's a few pieces of algae in there and bouncing off of the ones that are already in there. I think that will be the challenge for the human player, not getting it into the net, but having it not bounce out.
If you get
Yeah, I agree. At least like some of the more test-like stuff that we've done, and just the fact that they usually bounce off of surfaces. They bounce pretty well, and basically shows us that probably would be pretty difficult to score them.
I was just going to YouTube because that raises an interesting question. I think that truss that goes in the bottom of the barge, I think the balls can bounce off of that. I think the net lays on that truss bar. I gotta go back there. That raises a good point that if you throw it up in there, is the ball going to bounce off the bottom of the barge truss?
I think it does, because I don't think the net fully extends across the whole thing. I think that it does go down to that truss, and then on the other side it comes back up.
Yeah, very bouncy then. All right.
Multiple videos I've seen on that. I think 5 to 7 should be very doable, with a little bit of practice. But once you get over that, of course, you've only got 9 on your side. So unless you're stealing algae, it shouldn't be a huge issue. It depends on whether you're shooting it with a robot or human player too.
Yep. That's a good point. Okay, any last minute questions before we wrap it up for the night? Okay. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Next week, we're going to talk about bumpers. And John and I were talking about this about a week and a half ago, and we think it's going to go the full time. And we may have to even cut it short because a lot of folks are interested in what they're doing for bumpers. Seen a lot of research on this on Chief Delphi. So I think it's going to be a great talk. All right, everyone. Thank you again for another great roundtable, and we will see you next week.
See y'all next week.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Scott.